David, before we went to break, you were about to talk about a couple of other rough spots between Governor Scott and the legislature.
I was just going to follow up on what Steve said. You know, he used the phrase "threw the legislature under the bus" on teacher pay raises. I think he did so in another way, and that is that, you know, a lot of Republicans have spent the last couple of years in the legislature working against the idea of across-the-board teacher raises because they want to do merit pay raises, and that's a philosophical issue with a lot of Republicans. I would argue they've staked some political. They've spent some political capital on that. You know, they've given up the teacher vote in some cases because they believe that pay ought to be based on merit. And here comes a governor from their own party that says, yeah, okay, sure, but actually let's do an across-the-board pay raise. I think a lot of them feel a little betrayed by that.
Well, let's talk about maybe why he's doing this and what the results have been. I saw a poll that showed him dead even at 41%, Brent, with Charlie Crist, who's expected to run for governor again as a Democrat this time. Whereas not too long ago, Governor Scott was trailing in head-to-heads with Charlie Crist and had a high negative. Are all these turnarounds on these various issues helping the governor significantly, or do you believe this poll?
Well, there's a lot of polls that I don't believe, Steve. 41%, though, if you look at that, you take the rock rib Republicans and the hardcore Democrats, that's about where you're at in this state. They're both hover around 40%. I think there's a few more Democrats, a few 100,000 more Democrats. But it's the 18 and 19% that don't identify with either party particularly that settle these elections. And we saw that in the presidential elections, who's going to win that vote in between. So I'm not surprised by a 40-40 number. Now, if that ended up and you're sitting there in the high 40s for both of them, I think I'd be pretty amazed, particularly in view of the fact that most polls over the last couple, actually Governor Scott has hovered below 40%. Virtually every poll's been done up to this point. So his number's not really unchanged if he's at 41%. But I think at this stage, game's probably pretty meaningless. We all feel that Governor Scott will run, and I think most people feel that Charlie Crist will probably run as well. So, but I tell you, if it is those two, it's going to be a fascinating race that all of this country is going to watch.
That's true. Let's get back to the legislature, and we might come back to pure politics again. Just a couple of other major issues. Mary Ellen, both Speaker Weatherford and Senate President Don Gates are focused in on ethics as a major part of their priorities. What are they seeking, and will they succeed?
Well, here we have a Republican-led legislature that is just watched as the state has gone Democratic again for the president. They were able to elect a lot of Republicans. They kept the majority. They lost some seats to Democrats in both houses. But they see that their reputation and I think public officials in general are not trusted by the public. So I think having an ethics bill come out as the first thing out of the gate is an effort to restore some trust. And they've also identified that there are maybe grand juries awaiting to happen when it comes to the use of some of the campaign finance money that a lot of legislators have used. And that has to do with these committees of continuing existence that have morphed from being a membership-based kind of political committee to one that individual lawmakers have used as kind of their political slush funds. And they've been able to spend it not on electing themselves, but instead on paying for travel, entertainment. You know, there's stories about members who used it to even pay their mortgage. You know, it's just stories, but they want to reverse that. So they're ending the CCEs as we know it. We're not quite sure which form it's going to end up taking. But that's an attempt to kind of staunch the black eye that they see could happen and kind of their bad reputation.
Well, I've seen these kind of bills before. Sometimes they make it through the process and intact, and sometimes they don't. Brent, I see you've seen these bills before.
Mary, when we were warming up here, you know, it's just frustrating. Something's gone on. Somebody made a comment earlier about lipstick on a pig, and it's just so hard to take these every 5 or 6 years, these ethics reforms that go on in the legislature, and it doesn't change much. I mean, you know, they're always wiggling around something in some fashion, and it'll be interesting to see if anything meaningful does come out.
David, in addition to ethics reform, another big topic will be elections reform, because we had, once again, Florida in the national spotlight with long lines coming out of polls and charges of voter suppression from Democrats largely. So the Secretary of State has been around the state talking with election supervisors, has a big report with some new recommendations. That's going to be a big deal this year.
Yeah, and this fits in with the earlier theme of areas where Governor Rick Scott has changed his opinion from one thing to another. Although this is also an area where I think the legislature has made a genuine shift. Maybe genuine is not the right word. They have made a calculated shift for some reason or other that maybe it's not a good idea, for example, to reduce the number of early voting days. And I think they realized early voting is popular. They also probably looked at the last election and said, well, we reduced the number of early voting days, and as Republicans, we still lost. So, I mean, what's the difference? We may as well do what's popular. And this is one of the few areas that where I think we've seen a very short-term, wholesale shift in the way legislative leaders and the governor in this case look at an issue. 2 years ago, before the last presidential election, I mean, there was a concerted effort that some would deny, but I mean, I think it's very difficult to deny, in an effort, they would say, to crack down on fraud, to make it a little bit more difficult to vote, to go through certain procedures that I think many of them would say, look, everybody ought to go through these procedures. This is not, this is not curtailing your rights. This is creating order out of chaos. You got to do certain things to vote. And they made it harder and harder, and now we're swinging back the other way. I think they're going to, I think it looks like the legislature is actually going to pass a bill that makes it easier to vote, which would be going back in a different direction from the direction we've gone for the last several years.
Literally almost in 1 year.
Yeah, a change in 1 year. And Governor Scott will go along with that.
I think, Steve, the perception of suppression actually resulted in igniting the Obama base in Florida.
Yes.
Could have had a
It
backfire.
totally backfired.
Right.
That's
All right, let's roll through some pure political issues. Steve, I'm going to start with you. The gulp of Marco Rubio.
Oh, yeah.
That was so funny. That was everywhere. It went viral. Just picture of him going over here and trying to get that drink of water.
It launched 1,000 one-liners. I mean, she should have been drinking Kool-Aid.
Is he actively running for president?
I think so. I mean, I think it's all the signs are there. The Tampa Bay Times just did a story about the incredible team of people he's assembled, whose livelihood is to basically burnish the Marco Rubio brand. The guy is still largely adored by the national media. I mean, he's a major get for one of these Sunday talk shows. Rubio is big, so I think it's there. Absolutely.
Follow up: is Jeb Bush running for governor? I mean, for president.
I don't see it yet, not clearly. I think he enjoys the role he has as a highly respected voice around the country, at think tanks, at conferences. He's a big speaker at the upcoming CPAC conference, the Conservative Political Action Committee in Baltimore. There's another guy who's a A-list speaker for any Republican organization in the United States. In the case of Rubio, why would you go to Iowa in the month of February, unless you're an avid follower of girls basketball, which I don't think he is. So anyway, I'd say at this point more Rubio than Jeb Bush right now.
What happens if, they both are on the edge of running? Who yields to the other?
I say Rubio yields to Jeb Bush. Rubio's a lot younger. He's got time. Jeb Bush is still, I think, a bigger player in Republican politics.
Okay, Mary Ellen, after the governor's 180-degree turns on several issues, moving him more to the center, who do you believe has the better shot right now, looking ahead, to be the next governor, Charlie Crist or Governor Scott?
Well, to be technical about it, neither have announced. But we all know that Rick Scott is anticipating re-election, and the expectation is that Charlie Crist will also announce, although I think there seems to be more emerging questions about whether that will happen. I think one signal, because of all these, this extreme makeover of Rick Scott, it's a signal that he doesn't think there is going to be competition from the right, or we wouldn't have seen some of these shifts, particularly on Medicaid. And I think that people anticipate that he is going to have a ton of money, and that makes him very, very difficult to beat. However, as we've talked about, he's extremely vulnerable when it comes to his popularity ratings, and as everyone has mentioned, you've got to win in the middle in Florida, and you've got to win the independents. And whether he can do that is still an unknown question. So we know that Charlie Crist has had some appeal there. So I'm not going to handicap this at this point, because I still want to see how, what's the field going to even look like.
Does he get the Obama
15
ground
seconds.
game?
What's that?
Say, would Crist benefit from the Obama ground game? Would that machine work for him in the gubernatorial election? Not to mention Bill Clinton.
The answer is no.
No,
All right,
'cause
that's
there's
all
no
the time we
machine.
have for this edition.
You don't think they'd both be in the state helping him?
Thank you
No,
all
I
so
think
much.
Obama,
It's
the
been
name
fun.
will be-
See, we can't even close it down. We'll just do another edition right now. See you next time.